So tonight our speaker is Pieper, goes by Robb, and he'll be talking about Agile transformations. He is a public Scrum trainer as well as the CEO of Responsive Advisors, also my boss, but I will let him introduce, go more in deep. So let's give a warm round of applause for him.
Wow, thank you, Rosanna, and thank you everybody for coming. Got a really good turnout tonight. Was it the pizza or the topic? I'll take it either way. So yeah, I'm Robb, and I do public Scrum trainings. I do consulting. I do all kinds of stuff, and I deal with all kinds of companies going through a variety of different phases in the process of going through an Agile transformation. Anyone here going through this? Just a couple people? What's that about transformation? It's perpetual. It pretty much is. It's like being fit. It never stops. You have to continue to do exercises over and over again until you die. Being Agile doesn't stop. The transformation probably doesn't stop. But I mean, anyone going from maybe a really bad state to a better state recently? Like maybe we just had our first training this year? You? All right, we got one, couple. Who here is just kind of new to the Scrum field in general or Agile community in general? Couple? Great. So hopefully we got some new things here for you. A lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is based on my experience going through this with several different companies over the last 5 years. Try not to name any names, that way I don't get into too much trouble. I think those NDAs don't really expire. But let's get into it. So my laptop is over there. I normally have it kind of in front of me, and this is the first time I've given this talk. I'm preparing to give it in Las Vegas for the Agile Dev East Conference in this summer, which I'm sure will be nice and warm in Vegas, but I don't have it memorized yet, so if I have to keep looking at the slides, that's why. So we'll get started. Every company has this idea that they're a snowflake, like they're unique and that their challenges have never been faced before. Anyone have that situation? Like they think that what they're doing is new and somehow this hasn't happened before in the history of humankind? Couple? All right, throw me a bone here. Yeah, this isn't terribly uncommon, but the fact is it's all snow. All these companies are doing the same thing. They're having the same challenges, long delivery cycles, problems with quality, problems with all kinds of things. And we're going to talk about some of those things tonight. But I'm not just going to complain about them. I'm going to give you the ideas that I've tried that have worked for me over the years and kind of open the dialogue. If you have any ideas, please pitch them back. I'll help improve the talk. Can you see this okay? I had a hard time picking the right style. I thought this font was a little small, but this is a huge projector. See this? Good. Common challenges. No one knows what Agile means. Anyone have that problem? I think I've had that at every company I've worked with. Being Agile is a development problem. That's not really, the business doesn't need to be involved in that. Fixed scope, data, and money projects, guess what? They're created by your legal and finance departments. No tools to forecast development project completion dates, so we resort to Gantt charts. What else we got here? Lack of proper education. So you can't just read Scrum off the back of a Cracker Jack box and expect the organization just to work again. Low quality and long quality assurance cycles. The place I worked at, 8 weeks it took them to regression test because it was all manual. And can you imagine 8 weeks? You change one thing and 8 weeks of development or quality assurance has to go on afterwards. How do you get anything done? Most team members work on several projects at the same time. That's kind of normal, right? And does anyone have the luxury of working on just one at one time? 2. Okay, let me flip it around. Who is on multiple projects right now? All right, the majority of you. And hard to coordinate many teams on one initiative. Anyone working in a globally distributed situation where you've got teams in Australia and one up at the North Pole and everybody's everywhere and you're trying to coordinate this? Yeah, it's not easy. So guess what? A lot of companies have these problems. So Agile, what is it? Let's start there. All right, here's a question. Raise your hand if you think it's A, and I'll try to count. You only get one vote. What is Agile? Okay, raise your hand for A. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my God, hold on now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 people. That's at least half of you. 12 in the back. All right. How about B? It's a collection of software development practices. No? How about C? It's a result. No? D, a way to deliver projects faster? Ooh, spell check. Agile means Scrum. They're interchangeable. All right, so everybody's going with A, except for one? Oh, man. All right. Well, how can we be Agile if we don't agree? It sounds like some people didn't vote. If we don't agree with the definition of Agile we're going to have a long road. Let's take a look at this here. So this is how I think of an Agile company. An Agile company is one that can respond quickly to changing needs, changing customers, and changing technology. There's a lot of ways to get there. If you take the word Agile and replace it with the word rigid, they're kind of the opposite of one another, right? Are you a rigid organization or are you an Agile organization? Are you nimble? Are you quick? Are you light on your feet? So delivering very quickly can help, because if you deliver the wrong thing, you find out much, much sooner. Delivering way too late, well, you just spent a lot of money on something your customers don't want. Visually communicating, that's another way that you can make this a lot easier. If everyone can see what's going on and you're transparent, you can learn things much quicker. Breaking big problems into small problems helps too. So if you're working on something that's going to take you about 3 years to finish, why not break it down into 36 small projects and do one a month? Because if one of those projects is a failure, change, do something different. Treating people well can help too. Why I say that is, if you've got the same people working with you for a while and they genuinely like working for you, they're going to go the extra mile, and they'll do it happily. If you treat people like garbage, they're going to quit, and then you have to train new people that you will then treat like garbage and that will then quit again. Yeah, and of course, you do have to change the way you think, because the way you got results yesterday doesn't work in the new way. So does this make sense, or maybe change your mind? I know there's a lot of talk about the Agile mindset, but to me, this is the Agile mindset. This is the way you need to start thinking if you want to be light on your feet and you want to be anti-rigid. Agile. And feel free to interrupt me with questions or heckle me or whatever you like. I'm used to training big classrooms, so I'm okay with it. All right, let's look at our friend, the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Who has not seen this before? I almost didn't want to put it in here, but got a couple? All right, good. There's some people that should see this. A lot of what we talk about in the Agile community about what is Agile came from this document, essentially. It was a bunch of old Agile rock stars that some of them came up with frameworks, some of them were just really amazing programmers and wrote books. A lot of history here, but this is the Agile Manifesto, so let's read it here for a second. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value these things on the left more than these things on the right. Not that these things don't have value, just we value these things more. Let me pick on one. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Okay, well, what does this have to do with Agile? Remember, if you don't want to be rigid and you want to be Agile, you have to do things a little bit differently. Their goal was to be more agile, respond quicker to customer changing needs, respond quicker to the changing markets, and they believe that this way helps them do it better than this way. Processes and tools. Has anyone ever had to read a document to know how the company does things? And they say, well, these are the best practices. Do software development this way. No? Never had to read a document? Or how do we do something here? Or go read a process document. And there's a lot of push for best practices and for those to be documented and then to pass that knowledge on. But then that knowledge expires and we still do things the old way because, well, that's just how we've been doing them for 45 years. So this kind of turned that on its head and suggested a better way of working, but with the end goal of building nimble organizations that can respond quicker, because it's really frustrating to build a year's worth of software and then have to throw it all in the garbage. It's also not very valuable to your customers. So here's more on that. Some of the principles behind it, I'll just pick on a few random ones here. Here we go. Delivering working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference for shorter timescales. They're basically saying is this works better to make your customers happy. And right there at the top, their first point is our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous value delivery of valuable software. So they're spelling out this idea that Agile is a way to be nimble. And so that's kind of my argument on that. Now you can feel free to disagree, that's fine. But again, if we don't agree on what Agile is, it's very difficult for us all to get there. So you have to believe my definition is basically what I'm saying. Consistency. So by socializing this definition, or at least a consistent definition, in terms of the business, we can break down some of the barriers we have to further adoption. If your business thinks that being agile means we just play with sticky notes, sticky paper notes or whatever, Post-it notes all day, they fail to recognize the business significance of what we're doing. And therefore they fail to contribute to supporting it. Is anyone having a struggle getting this out of IT and getting it to other groups like HR and finance? You got one? Well, I struggle with it a lot because the finance group think, well, that's an IT thing. That doesn't affect us. But finance is creating the budgets that your projects are trying to work within and, in a way, set up your waterfall projects, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So this Agile thing, it's a development problem. And seriously? I have a weird sense of humor. What can I do to socialize this so it's not a development problem? Your development teams really are being fed by higher level goals. Your company is trying to accomplish something, and development is part of that, whether it be internal automation to make business processes flow more smoothly. Perhaps you're building a software product. What am I missing? What else would we write software for? To mine Bitcoin? So we're part of a bigger system. But unrealistic scope, dates, and constraints can't really be fixed by teams alone. We've got to change the expectation from a higher level. Agile practices really don't solve all your problems, but they'll expose a lot of them. Has anyone ever heard the expression, Scrum in particular is not a silver bullet, but a silver mirror that shows you your problems? Is that new? All right, I'm about to start telling jokes. You guys are... There's alcohol, coffee. Anyway, aggressively seeking the roadblocks that are preventing you from being agile and actively remove them. I mean, these are the things I work on. And I'll get into some of the hows in a little bit. But rigidity is a company problem. If your company is too rigid to respond to changing environments, your company is going to go out of business, and it should. Is that scary? Survival of the fittest, right? There was a statistic, I forgot where I got this, but like 40, 50 some odd years ago, the Fortune 500 was made up of companies that had been around a long time, like 20, 30 some odd years. Rosanna, maybe you remember more of this? I thought you found that. Anyway, there was some article, but suggesting that nowadays it's like the average length of a company in the Fortune 500 is a lot less. I think something like 15 or 20 years, and that's only going to be a problem that gets worse over time, that the biggest companies are going to be made up of a lot of younger companies. How old's Google? 20? How old is GE? Yeah, like 100 and something. I mean, they invented the light bulb. So, and they're feeling the pain right now of some bad decisions that were made 15 years ago, probably when Google was born. So anyway, just because you're successful and have been for 100 years does not mean you will be successful for 100 more. And technology companies they're leading the charge. Here's some ways you can socialize these ideas. Anyone ever used a lean coffee before? Look this up. It's probably too in-depth for me to get into too much tonight, but high level, it's a way to have an agendaless meeting, but dynamically build an agenda, invite a broad amount of people to come to this meeting, people from HR, from legal, from finance, from IT, and get them all talking about problems and finding solutions together. So whoever comes is the right people to come. That's great. Offer coffee, you talk about it in the morning, come away with some action items, and it's astonishing the kinds of things you can expose. But I warn you, do not turn this into a gripe session or it very quickly gets stale and people stop coming. Development team code quality lunches. I didn't know how else to describe this one, but one of my bigger clients that I worked with, they had a real issue with code quality. So you got a couple developers really fired up about modern software craftsmanship principles, like test-driven development, just unit testing in general. And they were having a hard time socializing this. So they thought brute force would work, and the managers tried forcing people to do it, and it was in their annual goals, and well, that didn't work. And then they tried, just kind of pushing this along socially, and that didn't work either. So what we ended up doing was we created these monthly meetings where people would get together, management would buy pizza, and they would just have a lunch together. Whoever wanted to come could come, voluntary. At first, it was just a handful of people. And they talked about software development ideas and craftsmanship principles, and they watched Uncle Bob videos. Who knows Uncle Bob or has seen the videos? Oh, awesome, Chicago code guy. So he's got some really funny videos. They're really, really good. Really good books, too. So they would read these books, go through these videos. They would do code katas. They would work together and practice these ideas in a room together. And over time, they'd start getting a few more followers. Yeah, maybe the pizza bribe helped. But then people would just start coming more regularly. And then next thing you know, they've got 15, 20 people coming after about a year. They came voluntarily because they wanted to, not because they were forced to. Was that everyone? No. But the idea was get it over the tipping point, to a point where there are more people coming to it than not coming to it. And then the people that aren't coming to it kind of maybe feel a little bit of tug that they better kind of get involved or it's going to look weird. So that's one way to do it. Leadership book clubs. Managers are not immune to this. They need to learn how to manage agile teams, or it kind of falls apart. A lot of managers got into that role not because they're great people managers, but because they were at the top of their technical professions. And so they're like, well, I can't make any more money being a programmer. I guess I'll go into management. And so they move over and they become a manager. I mean, it's not that simple. But if you're not good at being a people manager, you get stuck in middle management. You don't progress. The people you work with don't really respect you, but you are in a position of authority and power. And so it kind of it strangles the organization from the middle. By presenting some ideas, some new books, getting some managers in a room and talking about their problems, you can do some pretty cool stuff. So I started a leadership book club at a client here in Chicago. We started with a book called Drive. Dan Pink, anyone ever heard of it? Talks about goals and how to incent people, and that autonomy and mastery and purpose are great ways to get people to be engaged in the workforce, at least in knowledge work. And that carrots and sticks don't always work in problem-solving type professions. So we started with that, and it was eye-opening for them. One of the problems they had was the director of this department. She had set an annual goal for one of her employees that she had to finish this particular project by the end of the year within budget, la la la. She basically put a waterfall project in her annual goals. And come November, well, that wasn't going to pan out. So she started freaking out, treating her people really poorly. I noticed this, and so I started working with her to figure out what was going on, and that's when I discovered this thing was in her annual goal and that time was coming up, which means she probably wouldn't get a raise or whatever they would give her. So I socialized that this was maybe not the best sort of annual goal, and that's kind of where this book club was born and why we chose that particular book to start it off. So legal and finance. These are kind of underrepresented in the Agile community, but they're hugely important. I mean, they're impacting development teams greatly. So here's what's going on. Changing a tire versus building a time machine. Let's just start there. I mean, these are different activities. Changing a tire. We've done it before, right? I mean, mechanics do this every day. If you go in with your Toyota Corolla and you say, I need a set of 4 tires, they say that'll be a couple of hours, a few $100s, and you're going to get these tires at $100 a piece. Great. You walk away, you get yourself a cup of coffee, and you come back, and they're probably done on time. There are a few variables. They've been changing tires for a long, 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 long time. As long as we've had cars, tires get changed. Now, building a time machine has never been done before. We all agree that you cannot predict the cost, time, or budget. I don't care what kind of pressure you're under, you can't build a time machine at all, at least not yet. And by the time you can, you could maybe go back in time and alter the date that you're completed. Silly joke. But software development projects are somewhere in the middle. They're not predictable like tire changing, and they're not impossible like time travel. But every time you do a software development project, it's different. Even the same developer will solve the same problem in the same language differently the second time they solve it. Because the second time they've learned more things, they're more skillful, they've got a new framework to play with, or maybe they read the Gang of 4 Patterns book and now they're applying those. But you as a developer will solve the same problem differently the second time, and so that's introducing yet another variable. There is no constant in software development, which is one reason it's so difficult to predict. But it is doable, so there are other tools. Where does legal and finance come in? So on the legal side, if you're a third-party vendor or you're supplying software to some firm that's basically paying your bills, your contracts are going to be pretty specific. We want X, we want it by Y for this price, and if we don't get it by that time, we're going to charge you $20 million a week until we get it, and you're going to have a bunch of other vendors bidding against you to get their work. So what do? Of course you agree. Oh yeah, we can get all that done. We're going to get it done by December. It's going to be amazing, and we're the cheapest in town. Okay, so they go with you. Now you've got the waterfall problem. You're the one that's got to deliver by a date. Now that wasn't really set by you as developers. That was set by sales and by the contracting process. Anyone ever run into that one? A couple of you? Yeah, budgeting. That's really done, right about now? We're trying to figure out what 2018 is going to look like. So you've got a bunch of people sitting in a room figuring out how much we can spend in IT. So they've got a limited budget. They're looking for the largest ROI. And again, they think you change tires for a living. So just give me a date and tell me how much it's going to cost. And then they do some ROI calculation, and then they decide to fund you. But guess what? Now you've got a date, you've got a budget, and you've got to meet these commitments. And this is before you even got to estimating anything. Anyone have had that problem? You didn't even get a chance to estimate, and you've already got a date and a budget? Happens all the time. Here are some other things that are really difficult to predict. Hurricanes, the stock market, the economy. I'm sure there are a few more. But they use different tools to make sense of what's happening. Like, how do they figure out where a hurricane is going? I mean, we have an idea, right? Like Hurricane Irma, whatever is coming, it's going to hit Miami. But they tell you like 5 or 6 days out. Do you ever watch the hurricane projections? It's like this big cone, and it could go over there, it could go over here. And then you watch it, and it actually kind of curves to the right. I mean, no one's going to gamble that this is going to hit this point and make a commitment on it. We all know it's just a forecast. It's a weather forecast. But that word forecast, you see it here too. Economic forecasting, stock market. You'd forecast where the market is trending. Here's an example of a stock market forecast. In early 2012, they believed that this was the range of possibilities, but more than likely we were going to hit about 1351 in the S&P 500. But what actually happened is the market kind of got cranky, and it went just about here. I forgot the exact number, it's on my laptop, but I remember it. It's just above the point where we're losing enough, but still not even breaking even. So had I committed all of my retirement savings here to this investment and then waited till the end to find out how it did, I would have been a little cranky. But stock people understand this, that this is highly turbulent. This is it's a complex system. It's the same system you're dealing with. Product delivery is very complex. So anyway, the point there is speak in terms of forecasting and less in terms of commitment. Poor tooling. Here's another problem. You guys recognize that? Sorry, it's just like burning your eyes. Wait, what's this? This is our favorite Gantt chart, right? So, all the developers get together and they make some estimates up, and this is the time it's going to take to do their work. But if any one of these get off task or something else happens or they're putting out a fire, this entire project gets late. And this is the way we've been managing projects since, I don't know, like 100 years?
Since paper was invented?
Since paper was invented? I heard this was used initially in the military. I don't know, there's some weird history of the Gantt chart, but it's been kind of a pain for a long time, but we keep using it. Here's another chart. Any Jira fans? So there's a lot of tools out there. I'm not going to say I like Jira, but Jira has a lot of tools built in, and I thought I'd just throw them at you. The burn down chart, I mean, you can draw this on a napkin, you can put this on a whiteboard, but Jira has it built in if you just use the tool properly. This is how a Scrum team, or even a Kanban team technically, could forecast when they're going to be finished. They believe they're going to be finished here at the beginning of 2 weeks, and well, they actually end up here. Most of the teams I work with are usually somewhere up here. I don't know why they don't just look at the burn down chart. They would have seen that coming a long time ago. Here's another chart. Jira has this one, and most people don't even know it's there. It's called a version burn down, or version report. Anyone ever use this? So if you put in your estimates in the tool in such a way, and you update your velocity, as you should, closing sprints appropriately, this will create a nice forecast, much like that stock forecast, of when the entire version is going to be completed. Plus or minus some variance. You got that cone of uncertainty. So they're saying a predicted end date of October 15th, but we're in June. Is that pretty cool? These are surprisingly accurate. I mean, I wouldn't bet my life on them, but in terms of forecasting, this is the best we've got. Anyone forecast similarly? No? Do you guys use forecasting tools of any kind? in software development? How about this? Raise your hand if you do. Just a couple. All right, so it is possible to forecast your work in software development. All right, another one. We've got lack of proper education. And yes, sometimes you just have to learn something. All right, so if you don't know how to write test automation before or even after writing the code, that's something you should probably figure out how to do. Or a lot of this is going to be really hard. Manual testing is slow. If you can't write requirements that support agility, you're kind of doomed for failure. You can't just have a big stack of requirements like the old days and expect amazing agile results. If you can't talk to people or even manage your own emotions, yeah, you're going to have a hard time getting along on a team. You're going to have a hard time influencing people. And if you're a Scrum Master and you can't do this, you might as well get into a new profession. Most of being a Scrum Master is about influencing without authority, not about telling people how the Scrum process works. Managing employees or teams of Agile developers, if you can't do that, how do you expect to motivate people to accomplish crazy things under tight deadlines? So, what can you do? There's lots of stuff you can do. So, improving development skills. Practice writing tests for legacy code. Look at some old pile of garbage and just try to write an automated test around it. If you're a developer, you know how to solve problems, and you have code, and you have a coding tool, and you have an IDE, just try to test that code. And you'll find all the ways that it's untestable. So then you won't write untestable code in the future. And actually, next time you might write the test before you write the code, such that you don't have to write untestable code in the first place. Pair up with other developers and learn from them. As a matter of fact, you can pair up with pretty much anybody and cross-pollinate skills. It's great for testers and coders to work together because the tester's thinking, how am I going to break that? And the coder's thinking, how am I going to make this work? And by working together, they end up building a better quality product. Writing requirements that support agility. I should have put this number one. You got to start here. If you can't think of big projects in terms of smaller pieces that are valuable to your customer, you're going to be stuck building in a waterfall setting. A waterfall meaning I have to build all the architecture first and then all the UI first, all up until the first feature is sellable to my customer. If you can't break big problems into small problems, you will struggle continuously. And developing your EI, emotional intelligence, so work with HR. I mean, talk to them. See if they can facilitate like a DISC workshop. Has anyone ever heard of DISC? It's a sort of a personality profile. There's a few of them out there. There's DISC, there's like the MBTI, though the MBTI I would argue is not quite as useful. And true story, I believe it's the DISC profile was created by the same person who created the Wonder Woman character. Look it up, it's crazy. It's a really weird history. Oh wow, I can't even start. So managing employees or teams of Agile developers. If you realize that a strong technical leader doesn't make you necessarily a good people manager, you might think a little bit differently. Just try to read more books around how you influence people, how you manage human beings, and get the best out of them rather than hitting them with whips and expecting them to deliver under tight deadlines. So true story, that version report, it looks very similar to one that I tried to present to my last client. They had a project. They were about, they had 6 months left to go on it, and they wanted to know if they were going to finish. And they couldn't measure progress, the Gantt charts weren't working, and everybody was really struggling to figure out if they were going to make the deadline. So we printed out Jira, everything in their backlog we printed out, cut up into little like slips of paper, and I had the team just lay it all out on a line. This is large, this is small, and this is everything in between. And so they did their best to kind of move these things around as quickly as they could. I drew the Fibonacci sequence across it, we threw those numbers back into Jira, and we printed out that report. And based on their velocity up to that point, we were looking at 1.5 years to go. And they thought, the tool's wrong, we'll get it done in 6 months, we have to, we have a date. Okay, but you estimated it, it's based on your velocity, the tool just did the math for you, I mean, okay, it's your life. So they went ahead on this death march, and about 6 months later, when they thought they were going to be getting done, they're putting in the extra hours, they're doing the weekends, they were doing nights. They all gave up their vacations because they thought they'd be able to take them the next year, even though they had a use it or lose it policy. Comes around the next year, and no, they didn't hit their date. As a matter of fact, their company furloughed them all because things were just so bad. So they not only lost their vacation and lost all that time, but they got furloughed on top of it. And after another 6 months of trying to work this project to completion, they had to cancel it. It was a complete failure. So they discontinued what they were working on, canceled the project, and they were right. They were about still another 6 months away. So that chart can be really useful, but believe it. I mean, this is the data you're feeding it. It's just crap in, crap out. Yeah, take a class, read some books, blog posts, watch videos. There's lots of educational materials out there. I know not everyone likes to read books, and not everybody has the patience to listen to podcasts, but however you like to learn, this is the best way to get an organization singing again. It's by people retooling, by learning new things. All right, low quality and long QA cycles, building garbage slowly. What do you think about this one? How much time should you spend fixing defects for just about a month worth of work? Raise your hand if you think it should only be a day. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3. How about a week? And this is a month worth of work. 20 days? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. 1 month we should spend fixing a month worth of work. We got 1. How about other? 1, 2, 3, 4. Are we changing our votes? All right, well, guess what? Your clients don't pay you to fix bugs. So I'd argue 0 days. Now, I know that's not realistic, but that's certainly the goal. Why budget any time to fix bugs? Why not just make it impossible to make bugs? That would be a better investment in your time. Yeah.
The question asked, should.
Yeah, how much time should you spend? I'd say 0.
How much time do you? Never.
I agree with you. How much time do you spend fixing bugs for a month worth of work?
About half my job is fixing bugs.
And that's oh man, I'm sorry, man. Wow, half your job? There was a team I heard of.
Some reported by customers.
What's that?
Some reported by customers.
Some reported by customers. I mean, mistakes happen, but a lot of bugs are easily preventable if proper automation is put in place. Do you feel you have enough automation to prevent those kinds of bugs?
We're getting there.
Getting there? Well, some companies have longer to go than others. I'd say I haven't met a single company that's at 100% code coverage, meaning all of their business logic and all of their important stuff is covered under some sort of an automated test. Most are 10% or less. Some are less than 50, but I can't say I've met any over 50%. But I get to work with all the dysfunctional clients. So if you work for a really good company, let me know another number. Fixing bugs is generally a waste of your money. And if you're spending a lot of time fixing bugs, I mean, you have to do it, of course, but you're not getting paid any more money. As a matter of fact, it soaks up a lot of your resources to continuously fix bugs. And the longer it takes to regression test, the slower you are overall. We want to be quick, nimble. How can you be if you're carrying this boat anchor of an 8-week regression cycle? It's really challenging. And of course, long regression or long release cycles are just bad for business. If you're trying to get the new version of a product out the door and your competitor just ate your lunch, first to market sometimes makes the difference. Who is it? Windows Phone? Sorry if anybody's like a fan. I mean, they were kind of late. I mean, Android and iPhone really had kind of tied that one down, and then they're like, oh, we got the Windows Phone. It was still a cool phone. I'm not going to say it wasn't cool, but just too late. I mean, a couple % of the market, they decided to give up on it. Rumor has it they're making a comeback with it, but we'll see. Anyway, what can we do? So here's what I would suggest. Measure and visualize your present state of end-to-end delivery. How long does it take to get an idea out the door from concept to cash? And look at that and track it over time and try to make tweaks to improve it. Starting with quality, I mean, that's a great place to sort of shrink things down, because if you're spending less time fixing bugs, overall you're getting things out the door faster. And it's a lot cheaper if you fix the bugs sooner. So you can make huge strides by fixing the bug here rather than waiting all the way till the QA cycle where it's like, oh, we found a bug. Then we go to the development team, and they're like, I don't know where that's coming from. They look through the stack trace and the logs, digging through the code, and then finally they go, oh, that was stupid. And they hit a button and they fix it. But it costs hours and hours of your time to fix that kind of a bug. Merge QA and development. So I know some frameworks will say, oh, everybody should be on the same team, but it's really just kind of a good idea. If you guys are not on the same team and you don't have common goals, what happens? I mean, I worked with a group that their QA group completely reported to a separate chain of command, not even into the same CTO. So you've got these two groups that were at odds. They didn't want to work together. They didn't want to play together. And you couldn't even force them to work together because they didn't report through the same chain of command at the company. So I'm not going to say this is easy. It depends on how rigid your organization has become in terms of separating these functional areas. But you are on the same team. So the more you can encourage collaboration, encourage working together, the quicker you can make your overall release cycles. But making small mistakes faster. I mean, I know everybody hears the expression fail fast, but we are going to make mistakes. But if you just make little ones and you make them more rapidly, you learn quicker. Because I don't really learn from success nearly as much as I learn from failure. Imagine like a tightrope walker. Don't they always have a net underneath at least the first couple times? They're trying something out and they make a mistake and they fall off and they land on the net. Create lots of nets and then fall off the tightrope lots of times. And then you'll figure out all the ways that you shouldn't move so that you don't fall off your tightrope. This is a cool one I saw. It's called the regression progression. There was a QA team that got together and they were in charge of creating the back-end automation to support all the tests that they should have been creating all along. Unfortunately, what they did was they segregated them from the development team. I would have preferred them work together, but either way, what they did was they mapped out all of the manual tests that they had. It was something like 40,000, a lot. And it was like a year's worth of work. But they had like I don't know if it was like one of those thermostats where as you go up, they show the progression of it. And at 13,000, we're here. We've got 27,000 more to go. And they were showing the progress visually to everybody who walked by of the regression progression because they were building the automated regression test suite. I thought it was funny. No focus, no priority. That's another big problem. If you're a team member working on several projects at the same time, it's probably fairly painful. Now, let me give you an example. If you don't have enough people, that's sometimes a problem, but this is also a myth. I hear this over and over at companies where I go in there and I'm like, why does everybody work on multiple projects? Well, we don't have enough people. Okay. We don't have enough budget. It's another interesting excuse. Or we have multiple customers to satisfy, so we have to work on them all at the same time. You guys heard this one before? Okay. All right. The reality check is no company has enough people. We could always use a few more. Every company has more to do than it has time to do. Money's limited for every company, well, except for Apple and Google, I guess. And you're probably slower than you could be if you just figured out a different way of working with the same amount of people that you have right now. Now, I know that seems silly, but let's look at these two sequences. And I know we can't actually run this experiment because it would take a while. But you see these three sequences? It turns out if you write these sequences down on a piece of paper across, so the first time I go 1A, I, 2B, and then the II, the Roman numerals, and I go across them this way, it takes me a lot longer than if I go down straight through the sequences. Anyone know why that is? I mean like 40% faster if you just do them in sequence. Not because you've memorized it, but because it's actually easier to do.
Context switching.
Context switching, yes. Context switching is the waste that your brain accumulates when you switch from one problem domain to another. So if I go from one problem and then I try to undo it and then go into here and try to solve this problem, there's a ramp up time and kind of a ramp down time maybe. Either way, it's a non-zero amount of time that it takes your brain to process the new problem before you can really get into it. If you keep switching, you accumulate a lot more of this waste. So second run, usually 40% faster. And I do this in pretty much every Scrum class I teach, and I've maybe taught 40 this year, so I've seen a lot of data. But maybe one team, I think it ended up being closer than, maybe it was like 10% faster, and I was shocked. I had no idea why that happened, aside from maybe they were drunk when they wrote it down the first time, and got way faster the second. Or I said way slower the second time. But how about this? What if we forget about how it's easier to do one over the other, but what if I paid you more to do one sequence than the other? For example, I'm going to give you $25, but if you can finish this one, I'll give you 10, and if you finish this one, I'll give you 7, and if you finish this one, I'll give you 8. Would you do these in a different order than just randomly? Of course you would. You do this one first and get $10, or 15, or whatever I said it was. You get more money, and then you do the next one that is paying you the second most amount of money, and if I cancel the project, you just don't do the one that pays you the least. So if you combine these two ideas, and at an organizational level, you focus on the most important things, the ones that generate you the most revenue, or cost savings, or customer happiness, and you have your teams focusing more linearly on the same problem for a longer period of time, you can do a lot more with the same amount of people that you have right now and make more money. It sounds crazy, I know, but it's completely possible. Anyone ever see this equation, Little's Law? This comes from queuing theory, but this is way more boiled down and oversimplified. But but at the end of the day, it's close enough. Average work in process over average throughput rate equals average lead time. And average lead time is the time it takes to go from an idea to basically out the door to your customers. So what this is saying is that if you work faster, you can make that number go down, which would be good. So bang on the keys as fast as you can and get that work done. That's one way to approach it. Another way to approach it is reduce the amount of things you have in flight at the same time. So the math proves it. Mic drop. What can I do? So aim to reduce the size of your projects in general. It makes it a lot easier to pivot and to do different things. But in some ways, it allows you to stay focused without being too hyperly focused where you can't respond to other changes. Ruthlessly prioritize and reprioritize often. So Scrum is this concept of a product owner, and I'm sure you can apply the same concept to anything, but having a sense of priority is really important. And few companies that I work with seem to have any sense of what's important. They're just thrashing from one thing to the next, and they can't focus. So they do everything at once. Group I worked with for a while, when I first started, their PMO said they were working on 160 projects at the same time. Now this was a big company, but not that big. I mean, not big enough to support 160 simultaneous projects. They were probably working on each person maybe 3 at a time, something in that neighborhood. So they eventually reduced it to about 60, but then company pressures came in again and it started expanding out. But it really is. Stop doing things that are low value, and it's hard to know what is low value unless somebody's paying attention to what value means. What else is good here? Limit the amount of projects happening at once. Absolutely. And so we saw with this other example, and I wish I could walk you through it. This would be a great group to do that with. But you'll speed up by getting more done with the same team. If you can focus on priority and focus on staying in a similar domain for a longer period of time. All right, the last one. This is the toughest one, and this is such a long subject. It's kind of not a newer field, but the newest frameworks in the Agile world are in the scaling domain. So SAFe is a popular one, whether you love it or hate it. Nexus, Less is another one. There's another one called Disciplined Agile Delivery, and I'm sure there's a dozen more. But so what is scaling in general? It's really getting more output by adding more people in teams. Global companies will often pull in people from all the way around the world. So probably the most painful if you pull somebody in from Australia. You've got one in from New York and a couple in from China and India, and you're trying to work as a team. Because if you do the math on those time zones, there's almost never a time of day where it's within normal hours for anyone on that team. So I had a group, they were called the Blitz team, and they were going to do some amazing stuff for this former company, which will remain nameless. I'll tell you who it is if you ask me later. But they did this. They pulled in all their top experts from around the company. Now, with 120,000 people in this company, it's amazing that they couldn't find anybody in the same area. So they pull in all these people, and they all come to New York, and we all sit down and try to get them started. And I'm working with them on when they're going to have all of their key meetings. And it turned out that, yeah, there was really no time that they could all be together during working hours, like anywhere during daylight or even like reasonable what you consider waking hours. So one person, the Australian, he decided, oh, you know what, I'll just come to the retrospective at 3 in the morning. That'll be fine. I'm like, are you kidding? He's like, it's only for a few months. It won't be a few months, dude. Yeah, that project went on for like 8. Because they didn't really get what they thought they were going to get done in 3, and so on and so forth. But if you're going to work around the clock or work distributed like that, it's really best if you can keep people clumped in the same geography as much as possible. So if you've got people in Australia, try to build a team in that area if possible. Or don't take the one person that you do have in Australia and make him be on a team with someone all the way around the world. It just makes it that much harder. But working around the clock sounds great, but there are some challenges to that. It's very difficult to communicate when you send somebody an email and then it takes them 24 hours basically to respond because you send it and then 12 hours later they get it and then they have to send an email, and by the time you're waking up you get the email and oh god, that's not what I meant, and you send them another email and round you go. Hard to deliver fast this way. So yeah, it creates a communication challenge or nightmare, however you look at it. Usually requires a lot of project management people to try to make sense of things and keep the coordination and keep transparency high, but I don't know if that really helps. Has anyone ever dealt with this before? A couple of you? All right. Who says they got it figured out? We cracked that nut. No one. Okay, good. not good, but I don't want to be preaching to a bunch of people like, that's easy, are you kidding? What ends up happening a lot of times, you end up distributing in these small little fiefdoms where we don't want to show you our backlog or our reports, so we're just kind of hidden off in this little cluster in another part of the world where we work together. And then these people are over here, and they don't want to show them theirs. So it's very difficult for these project managers to get any information out of them if they're hoarding it all. Yeah, and then imagine QA and integration if you're still working in a traditional way. Even if you're not, integration across multiple teams around the world is extremely challenging. But here are some things you can do. So get good at working in small teams first. If you can get that to go, then try to link up with another team and see if you can do it that way. And then as you grow, add more teams and manage that complexity. And there's some great frameworks you can use. I just mentioned it before, but Nexus, Safe, Less, etc. Try to minimize handoffs. So the more handoffs you have between different groups, the more communication and the more integration challenges you'll find. But maximize transparency, of course, and communication. So ways you can maximize transparency when you're distributed. I mean, there's a million digital whiteboard tools now. Google's got a new one called, oh man, does anyone know? It's like recently released. Some fancy 55-inch digital whiteboard. It's connected through iOS apps and Android apps and you name it. All right, one of my friends is way more geeky than I am. Focus heavily on quality from the beginning. So if you're building garbage and you're trying to scale it, you're just going to amplify that garbage. And it's going to be a lot harder to clean up at the end. So these are some of the things that you can do. And I mean, this is a huge topic. People spend 2 to 4 days in a class just learning how to do this, and then years actually practicing it to try to make it work. So I don't want to overly trivialize this. This is very difficult. But these are all the common challenges I've run into. So are we in closing? About 7 o'clock? Yeah, about time here. There are many challenges, but many solutions. These are just some of them that I've come across, some of the more popular ones that came off the top of my head, some of the ways that I've helped clients, and yeah, any solutions you guys have, I'd love to hear about them. I don't like that resolution. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Since you work at different clients at different stages of the Agile journey, do you find that like the companies that are not as advanced, quote unquote, are they making similar mistakes to what their predecessors did, and so everybody has a similar learning curve, or is each company making different mistakes along the journey, quote unquote?
I'd argue they're making a lot of the same mistakes. And even if you pull some of the more advanced people from company X and put them to company Y, it's not usually enough influence to change that company and to get them to not make those same mistakes. I think the best way to not make those same mistakes again is have people who know what they're doing and then start a new company and then just make that the way they do things. But who knows, in 20 years, maybe that won't work anymore. But yeah, these patterns I see play out over and over again. Small companies, big companies. Small companies have the advantage that they can socialize some of these ideas more quickly because they're more tight-knit. Oftentimes they're in the same building, or if they're not, I mean, they have a closer relationship. Really, really big companies that grew a lot through acquisitions have it harder because a lot of times they've acquired different cultures. Company X in New York does things differently than Company Y in Santa Fe, which does things differently than the one they acquired in Florida. And even though they're in the same country, I mean, they're basically doing things very differently. And in some cases, they'll resent the way that management is trying to superimpose this larger culture on these small microcultures. But over years and years of pressure and replacing management, eventually they homogenize, but they homogenize into this kind of gooey state. So I'd say the larger companies, especially ones that grew through acquisitions, are probably the slowest to adopt, and so they go through these painful learning situations for much longer periods of time. So I'm curious what the next 20 years has to say about not just the Agile profession, but product delivery in general. Who's around in 20 years and who isn't? It'd be really interesting to see.
Just to follow up on that, then, so those large-scale frameworks that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
you're neutral on them. They're not good or bad.
I'm trying to be neutral. It's not the frameworks that are necessarily bad, but your interpretation of them or your trainer's interpretation of them can make things messy. So a lot of people have things, I won't get into that rat hole, but yes, I'm trying to stay neutral. There's good ideas everywhere. There's good ideas in all of those frameworks. but getting good at least one of them is going to help you quite a bit. Any other questions? No? We all out of pizza? I'm hungry. All right, well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate everyone being here. This is a really great turnout. Thank you.